For energy security, economic prosperity and climate commitments, we need a rapid transition away from traditional forms of power. So says the Isle of Man's Energy and Sustainability Centre, who last week brought together experts from Denmark, the Faroes and other islands who have developed strategies to achieve 100% renewable energy as early as 2030. Relatively cheap energy and stable prices, a cleaner and protective environment, and less dependency on rogue states. Sounds too good to be true. The Faroe Islands has a population just under 2/3 of that of the Isle of Man, and yet they have a plan for 100% renewable electricity by 2030, fully funded by the island's government and people. Terje Nielsen and Helma Marie Trondheim are from the SEV, the Faroes National Power Company. Terje is head of research and development, and Helma Marie developed a roadmap to ensure grid stability and supply reliability in a 100% renewable electricity sector in the Faroe Islands by 2030. They explained in a very noisy conference room how difficult finding that last few percent of renewables in the mix is so difficult.
Because you need to balance the production and the demand. So renewable energy, you cannot control it because it is there when the wind is blowing or when the sun is shining. So you need to store it, and storage is expensive.
I suppose then in relation to the project, I mean, what you were describing in the presentation was effectively by 2030 100% renewables. But there is an opportunity as well to go further than that, and you then sort of speculated a little bit in the question and answer session about the prospect of hydrogen production and actually fueling the fishing vessels with hydrogen. Tell us a little bit more about how that might be achieved.
Yeah, but in the current roadmap, we don't look into hydrogen as such, but if you look beyond 2030 and take into account that the fishing fleet will be transformed into some green fuel, then demand will be so high that we cannot provide that with onshore wind. So we need to look at an alternative. At that point in time, maybe a floating wind farm would be a potential outcome. But there are also other possibilities, just to have a cable up to some of our neighboring countries. But we would like to provide our energy on our own first and foremost.
And in terms of neighbouring countries, I mean, obviously you've got Greenland and Iceland reasonably close. Denmark is your sort of your equivalent of our equivalent, which is the United Kingdom. How much collaboration is there between the islands, if any?
I would say not enough, but I would say a potential subsea cable would most likely go to Shetland or to Scotland, in my opinion at least. No, there's definitely too little cooperation between the islands.
There's a friend of mine who's an MP and he lives on the Isle of Barra, and he's got this wonderful map on the wall with the Isle of Barra in the centre of the map, and the Faroe Islands and Iceland and the Isle of Man Island all surrounding, and Barra is the centre of his particular world. Do you think sometimes we as islands and people living on islands, we tend to assume that all the good ideas and the best decisions are going to come from the larger neighbours or countries on which we depend?
I think quite the opposite. I think very often it is the islanders that come up with the innovative solutions, and that's the case here as well. So no, I think the islanders are actually are in the forefront when it comes to green energy and the transition.
And your hopes for the future? Are you as confident as Helma Marie that by 2030 you will have transformed the electricity system in the Faroe Islands?
Definitely. We've seen that from a theoretical point of view, it's doable. The question is whether we take the right decisions in the upcoming years. So it is definitely possible, and I certainly do believe we will do so.
And presumably the financial sort of turmoil that the world is in for various reasons at the moment plays a lot into your hands, in as much as the conventional fuel sources, gas and gas in particular, but also oil, their prices are becoming prohibitively expensive compared with renewables.
Yeah, for sure. And what we say is that getting 100% green energy in the Faroes is not only beneficial, but it two times, because you get rid of the oil. It's the fluctuating nature and the cost of oil, but also we benefit the environment as well. So it's for us it's really important.
Professor Curran ceased being the Isle of Man's advisor on climate change at the end of October, but he continues to be a visiting professor at the Centre for Sustainable Development in the University of Strathclyde. He spoke passionately at the conference about the need for urgent action to protect global ecosystems so that they can continue to support and protect us in the future.
Yeah, I'm delighted to be here, asked to give a short presentation at this conference, and this time I've been talking more about the nature crisis, which is so closely connected to the climate emergency. We know that we rely on nature for so many of the services provided free by Mother Nature that underpin our lives, our livelihoods, our enjoyment of living. But you know, even the World Trade Organization has stated that 55% of the global GDP relies entirely on healthy ecosystems. So there's a huge connection to the economy as well, which is primarily what this conference is about, the connection between the economy and climate and, in what I was saying, nature as well. They're so intimately connected and so intimately connected with the kind of life and future that we all want around the world and, of course, here on the Isle of Man.
And it's not all doom and gloom, is it? I mean, some of the figures that you were quoting in terms of the potential for world economic growth by actually addressing some of the issues surrounding climate change. I mean, these figures, even for someone like myself who has no real knowledge about big finance and world economies, it all sounded very optimistic, which again perhaps is not what we might expect from people engaged in promoting the problems associated with climate change.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really important we recognise the risks we're running on planet Earth, both with climate change, and there's reports just come out today and yesterday in preparation for COP27 in Egypt, which is coming up in a few days, of the severe risks we're running with climate change, and we must reverse back away from the dangerous limits that we may face on climate change. And the same is true in nature, in biodiversity. There's a UN conference coming up in Canada in December, exactly analogous to the climate change one in Egypt, and it's proposing some very radical changes to the way that we treat our natural world, and that we need to respect it more for everything that it provides to us in terms of clean air, clean water, crops, and even nature and wildlife that we can go out and enjoy. So yes, let's recognise the risks, but equally there is a huge amount of finance available globally to tackle these problems. It was announced last year in Glasgow at COP26 by Mark Carney that 450 major institutions had signed up to the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, and they have something like, if my memory is correct, $150 trillion worth of assets at their disposal. So there's an enormous amount of money can shift around and very rapidly can start doing good rather than harm. So there's the hope for the future, that money begins to move rapidly into the kind of technologies and the kind of changes to the way we lead our lives that will solve both the climate crisis and the nature crisis at the same time. And with that amount of money shifting, we can do it very fast.
And you also talked about the need to consider circular economy, to actually embrace a circular economy. I mean, this is something that perhaps, the last 100 years has been unusual, certainly for the Isle of Man, in that we've moved away from what used to be very much a circular economy. We tended to produce whatever we needed on the island, and that's how our economy worked. But then perhaps we contributed with the whole lead mining industry, when we at one stage we produced a third of the world's lead supplies from the island, and things seem not to have gone in the right direction perhaps over the last century.
I think that's true, and it's a very interesting kind of cultural dimension to what we're talking about. You know, it's been estimated that 90% of the decline in biodiversity globally is attributable to the extraction of raw materials from the planet and their subsequent processing. 90% of the damage to nature down to that. So if we can get away from that kind of these days traditional view of our economy, in that it's extract, manufacture, dispose, and we move towards the more circular model, then we're going to not only reduce our carbon emissions, because it will be driven by renewable energy, but we'll also start reversing the damage to biodiversity, and that in turn will help counterbalance climate change as well. So these are all interconnected issues, and I believe, and you said it yourself, there is the potential here on an island to develop an economy that is based very much more, if not entirely, on the circular model. That is, products are intrinsically designed from the outset to be made of recycled materials, but to be made and manufactured and produced in a way that they can be mended. And Europe is thinking about a right to repair directive, so that all of us would have a right to demand that every product can be repaired rather than thrown away and we have to buy a new one. So they can be repaired, they can be disassembled and upgraded to keep them up to date and modern, or if they get beyond that point, then they can be taken apart and the individual components used in new products, or bottom of the hierarchy, in this case, they can be recycled. Now, that needs a very kind of collaborative approach, obviously. It needs cooperation amongst different businesses. It needs customers that are aligned with that kind of business model, and I think most of us would be. And again, it's ideal for an island nation to try and address that challenge to develop a much more circular economy. And here in what I was saying at the conference, I was particularly arguing, well, why not begin to look at the agri-food system here on the island? Because I noticed just yesterday the Isle of Man NFU was posing to government that there was a need for a food resilience strategy. Well, just building on what you yourself said, if you want resilience in your agri-food system, then it needs to be more self-sustaining and almost by definition more circular. And the circular economy will drive down climate change emissions quite significantly and will hugely decrease the amount of raw materials that we extract and exploit out of planet Earth.
I think you mentioned that you're a physicist by training. And maybe I'm taking some very large leaps here in terms of theory. Were you able to travel in time and travel forward 100 years from now? How do you think the decades that we're currently living through are going to be viewed?
I'm an optimist by nature. As some would say, a naive optimist, but I do genuinely believe that the next decade will see a transformation worldwide, and I'm convinced it'll happen very rapidly here on the Isle of Man, in the way that we lead our lives and the way we run our economies, and it will shift to that sustainable model that can last for centuries into the future. We know how to do it. We have the answers. It's the will and the finance and the investment to make it happen. And I think if you stood here in 100 years' time, you would actually see a much improved lifestyle. It would be happier, it would be more collaborative, the nature outside would be more vibrant, we would be healthier, the world would be less polluted, there would be less conflict over resources. I only see a better future for all of us.
Professor Henrik Lund is Editor-in-Chief of Elsevier's international journal Energy, the main developer of the advanced energy system analysis software Energy Plan, a professor in energy planning at Aalborg University, and a world-leading scientist, ranking among the top 1% on the Thomson Reuters list of highly cited scientists. He spoke of his experiences in Denmark. And you began today's proceedings with an excellent presentation, effectively a guide to small countries in terms of moving from a fossil fuel dependent society, economy, to one which was relying wholly on renewable energy.
Yes, that's right. I mean, in Denmark for quite some years now, a very united parliament have had this target of going for first fossil-free energy solution, 100% renewable energy, and now they are wording it like climate neutral 2050 Denmark. And of course, these political goals, it's very important people like myself and the industry and everybody follow up on then how to do it. So that's what we have been engaged with, and what I basically told this morning was a strategy that my research group from Aalborg University together with the Danish Association of Engineers put forward in 2006 and also have been updating. And in this plan we are very specific on what kind of technologies should we have, how should we do it, how would those technologies work together in order for Denmark to be climate neutral. And we even say before 2050, we say we could do it already 2045. Maybe next time we'll say 2040, because it's really urgent that we do it as soon as possible.
And I mean, Denmark is a field leader, I think, as a country. Is setting a target that's so far distant, to a certain extent, is that part of the problem? I mean, we've heard from the Faroe Islands that that they've effectively set their target of 100% renewable by 2030. That seems a very narrow target, and yet there's you have impetus then to actually deliver that change. Whereas if people think that the target is 2050, there's no real urgency at the moment to actually make that difference.
No, you're absolutely right. This is very, very important. I mean, setting a long-term target, everybody can do that, and then they're dead and gone before anyone notices. So, of course, it's very important when you do that you actually also have a strategy, and you also start implementing that strategy today, and not tomorrow, and not in 5 years, and so on. But that's also part of the Danish Parliament to do that. So just to mention, up till now we have built so many wind turbines that more than 50% of the Danish electricity is coming from wind turbines already. As I mentioned also earlier today, we have expanded district heating to half of our buildings. So half of our buildings have not experienced the raising prices from gas and electricity as in many other countries, simply because we recycle waste heat from industry and from power production and so on, and heat our houses with it. And also a recent development is that we have been expanding our production of green gas, biogas from manure and biomass in Denmark to a degree. So actually right now 30% of our natural gas is coming from green gas, and is green gas and not natural gas fossil fuels.
And How has Denmark overcome the resistance that exists? I mean, certainly it exists in the Isle of Man and may well have existed in Denmark. How do you overcome that fear or the perhaps even the fossil fuel lobby, which very clearly doesn't want the change to happen? How did Denmark approach that?
Well, it's first of all, I mean, if we take the wind turbines, it was actually the people who wanted the wind turbines themselves in the 70s and 80s after the oil crisis, and so it was all this not in my backyard was not really an issue in the beginning. Then later on, we learned in Denmark that if you have your own wind turbine in your backyard or in your neighborhood, then it's very beautiful. And if you make money on it, then it's even more beautiful. But if somebody else, like a big power company or something, or a government, come and place a lot of wind turbines in your backyard, and the only thing you have to do is look at them and be ignored and hear the noise, and you're not making any money, and it was not your idea, then they are really a burden. So, and I think we have been good at doing this in the early days. We are not so good at doing it any longer. We should learn from ourselves and our own history in that respect. But apart from that, I think this is the way to go, that people can own it themselves, and people can also initiate it and get the idea and bring it about.
Because again, this seems to be part of the solution that's being offered, is that you need to scale up, you need big projects, because there are people out there who are willing to invest trillions of pounds, dollars, krona, whatever the currency may be, euros, of course. But actually, people are more likely, communities are more likely to buy into small-scale projects.
Yes, but I think we maybe need both. I mean, if we should have a wind turbine in my neighborhood, I live in a small village in the northern parts of Denmark, I would like to be a part of it, and my neighbors. So, and we already did that some years ago. Now it's not any longer. But that is one way of going. But I also think we need a lot of wind turbines offshore, for example. And in Denmark, the Danish power company Ørsted had just announced, together with another big company or the developing company called Copenhagen Infrastructures, that they are going to build, without any subsidies or anything like that, they're going to build 5,000 megawatt of wind turbines. This is so many wind turbines that they can produce as much electricity as single point, if that will ever be finalized. And they are doing this without subsidies, and they will be ready to produce already from 2027 onwards. So I think that's impressive, and we also need that. We need both.
One of the things that I found very encouraging about today is the optimism. So I'm guessing I know how you're going to answer this question. How optimistic are you that globally we are going to meet the necessary targets to keep climate change to the minimum necessary for us to continue to have the lives that we expect at the moment?
There are a lot of reason to be pessimistic. A lot of reason, and you can list them all, and then you can be paralyzed and do nothing. Luck-wise, I was born an optimist, and I can't help it. I am an optimist, and I really enjoy life, and I've got an electric car, and it's the most wonderful car I ever got, and it's fueled by wind and so on and so forth. I got district heating, and everything is working. I'm promoting this, and I'm simply an optimist. And of course, we can do this if we are willing to do it.
And of course, one of the messages, the clear messages from many of the speakers today, is not only is it a better way to do things in relation to climate change, but it can be cheaper as well.
Very much so. I just mentioned, for example, I learned that here on Isle of Man you have a waste incineration plant, but the heat from the waste incineration plant is just wasted. We have a lot of waste incineration plants in Denmark, but we built a pipe so that the hot water from the incineration plant can go out to some buildings and eat them. and it's some of the cheapest heat we have, and people fight to get more incineration plant into the district heating system. We are even importing waste in order to have waste enough to burn so we can heat our houses cheap. Also, I live in Aalborg where there's a cement factory that actually heats 20% of our district heating. So there's a lot of things that is cheaper. And right now, as I mentioned before, all those district heating consumers in Denmark, they have no increase in their energy bill, while all the gas people have. So everybody wishes to go to district heating now. So it's only a matter of if we can do it fast enough.
Founding directors of the Isle of Man's Energy and Sustainability Centre, Ralph Peake and Dave Quirk, have delivered a lot in the relatively short time since the centre was established. Siobhan Fletcher asked them why they felt the centre was necessary and whether the conference achieved its ambition.
Well, what the Energy and Sustainability Centre is doing is trying to bring together the public and private sector. Public sector has done some great work, got some legislation in place now, so the framework's there, but the private sector really do want to see some action. They want to see us moving forward. We need to demonstrate to ourselves and the rest of the world that we're serious about this, and so we do want to see some action. So we see our role as actually bringing those parties together. We want to bring some experts to the conversation. We want the public to join in that conversation, to listen and to learn alongside those experts, because ultimately we needed a solution for the Isle of Man. And so we're all got Manx connections, and we really do want to get something that works for the Isle of Man, that will give us sustainable energy at an affordable price.
This kind of feels like the private sector having to step in, really, from lack of meaningful action from the Isle of Man government in a way. So shouldn't government be doing more, do you think?
I see it as working alongside, to be honest. I think the government, as I say, set out the framework for the legislation, and it's now really where the private sector can bring the expert knowledge in and actually get a roadmap of what the Isle of Man needs. So I see it more as a partnership, to be honest, and the government's got an awful lot of work to do in the future. You know, there'll be more legislation, you know, there'll be managing the public's expectations. Government will play a key role in this solution, but we also do need the private sector. Professor James Curran summed it up in his impact report, 3 years ago. You can't do this alone. The private sector must work with the public sector.
Do you think that message has kind of gotten through a bit, that cooperation? I mean, at the conference last week, it was opened by Minister Jane Poole-Wilson. You had a lot of ministers present. I saw them all there. Do you think that message is getting through, that we need a bit of cooperation between that, like, public and private sectors?
I do. I do think it's getting through, and I'm very grateful for the time that Mrs. Poole-Wilson gave. She stayed the whole day, listened to every speaker, and gave a great summing up at the end. So we know that government are listening, and we know that they do want to do something. I think we saw a turning point in COP26 last year, where we saw the international financial houses come together and realise that they've got a part to play in this. They need to take some responsibility. And we really did see a change then. And I think that's now here on the Isle of Man. I think the conference really has enabled senior government politicians to really understand that. We had some senior officers in the room as well, alongside the MUA. So the right people were there, and they heard directly from experts who are on the similar journey to us, but people from the Faroe Islands are actually 2 years down that road, which is absolutely great to hear that firsthand.
And Dave, bringing you in a bit here, you provided the conference with a summary of the best options for sustainable power in the Isle of Man. So what are they?
Yes, well, we've been working on this for a few years now, but similar to the Faroe Islands, what works well in the Isle of Man, of course, are invaluable fuel is wind. So wind turbines will be part of the solution. Solar as well. There are sunny places on the Isle of Man, so that combination works quite well. In addition, we'll need energy storage because, as you know, the wind doesn't blow necessarily when we need the power, and so to store surplus power and then be able to reuse it is the energy storage part. Well, I live in Denmark, who have been at the forefront of the energy transition. Of course, it's thanks to Denmark we have actually a wind industry at all. They started investing in the early 80s, actually related to an oil crisis. So that often motivates people, and that early investment, has meant now wind wind is really the cheapest form of energy by a long way. It's probably four times cheaper at the moment than oil or gas. So that gives us room for additional investments as well, and provides revenue for the Isle of Man for instance, to improve the infrastructure.
And Professor Henrik Lund came over from Denmark as well to the conference last week, and I was chatting to him about district heating, which I'd never heard of. And he was saying that's something we maybe could have or should invest in the future here. Do you think that's something we actually reasonably could do?
It's probably a medium-term investment, but what it is essentially warm water. You see films of New York and you see steam rising. That's district heating. And so what you use is either waste heat, which could come from, for instance, the energy from waste, Richmond Hill, or you can have community-scale heat pumps, for instance, that would produce warm water, and then you distribute it to homes. The advantage of it is it's at scale, so it's cheaper than everybody individually having heat pumps, and it means it's trouble-free. You don't have to worry. So I live in Copenhagen. I live in an 18th century house, which, because it's a listed building, can't have double glazing. It's theoretically not very energy efficient, but we get warm water, and that house is warm and dry the entire year, and it's cheap and trouble-free.
I mean, I definitely think that's something that we would all love to have here, especially, cost of living crisis as well, now that everyone's contending with. So here for the Isle of Man, you mentioned wind power. That's something that's always in the conversation here. Why is tidal and wave power not in the mix? And, nuclear power and geothermal power, surely they could be considered too.
They're all interesting. We think we've considered all options. You could say the problem with tidal energy and wave energy is that it's expensive. What didn't happen in the 80s was investment in wave and tidal. So it's far behind wind and solar. So if you want to buy something relatively cheap off the shelf, then it's wind and solar. However, Faroes is investing in tidal, as is also the Orkney Islands, but it's just at the moment 4 or 5 times more expensive. It's the same price as oil and gas, actually. So if you're going to choose the cheapest option, then it's always going to be wind and solar at the moment. As regards geothermal, what you need is heat in the subsurface. It needs to get fairly warm fairly quickly when you drill a borehole, which it doesn't in the Isle of Man. The Isle of Man is relatively cold. And the other thing you need is water, because you bring warm water up, and there isn't aquifers or deep water reservoirs in the Isle of Man. So the two elements you need are not here, so it's geologically it's not suitable for geothermal. And nuclear is an interesting one, but none of the world's nuclear waste is in permanent storage, so we've got an inheritance there. Of course, the power plants have to be decommissioned at some stage, which is a real expense. That's true in Japan and France at the moment, and it's a really expensive technology to build in the first place, and takes 15-20 years. So really, if we'd thought about it properly, maybe many years ago we would have done it properly, but because the investment didn't happen and because we haven't dealt with the waste, it's not really an economic option or an environmental option at the moment anyway.
We've got arguably a rich reserve of gas in our eastern shore. Playing devil's advocate here, in a way, shouldn't we be exploiting that before going after these more renewables?
Well, the reality is a very small chance there's actually a gas resource offshore Isle of Man. So if you make, what I as a geophysicist have done in the past, is you make maps of the subsurface. Now you can make a map of the land surface here in the Isle of Man. It's got hills and valleys, so Snaefell is the highest. You can make similar maps of the subsurface, it's hills and valleys. The data you use is it's like looking through a really blurred glass. It's sort of cracked. It's hard to see what you're doing, but you make an interpretation of what you're seeing. And you map, again, you try to map hills and valleys. Where the well, it's called 111225-1, was drilled, is in a valley. Now, that's not where gas collects. What normally happens in the subsurface is oil or gas rises to the highest points, which would be the hills. So you're looking for a subsurface Snaefell, which is the Morecambe Bay gas field, for example. That was not the case where this well was drilled. So it's the last place you'd expect to find gas. there was a hint of gas, but down at that depth there often is gas because there's coal down there, for instance. So I think the chance of there being a large reserve of gas is very small. And the other issue is BP, who drilled the well, couldn't get any gas to flow to surface. So you need to be able to produce it to be able to use it. And so the chances, if you drilled another well, you would have the same situation. Even if there was gas there, it wouldn't flow to surface. So really, it's a very, very long shot. Most unlikely. Even very good prospects for oil and gas, only 1 in 5 of them get developed, become commercial discoveries. If you drill an exploration well, it's a 4 in 5 chance you're not going to find something.
So actually our wealth of rich reserve of gas that we all think we've got around the island might actually just be a big myth.
I think it's been exaggerated.
It's a very, very small chance of finding something that would be. And of course, it still takes 8 years at least to develop it. So it's too late then anyway.
Because by then the gas turbines will be out of service.
And it's not going to address the current issue, whereas, we could develop wind and solar in a few years onshore.
So then, do you think that renewables can deliver that cost-effective and reliable energy for the Isle of Man then, if we get working on it now?
Absolutely. Provided the legislation, the permitting is relatively streamlined, so there is a sort of onus on government to make sure that can go through fairly quickly. Then, yes, we can produce a surplus of wind and solar power. The one thing is making sure that you can have the power when demand requires it. So there is an element of storage there, so that when everybody turns on their television and that there's power available.
Just to put it to you both quite bluntly, really, shouldn't we have done all of this years ago?
Yes, you could say that, but you've got to start from where you are. I think where we are now, it's easy for people to see the benefits of renewable energy. I think with the recent price increases in fossil fuels, people are really now paying attention to that because it is going to affect their costs. But I think it's also the right time to do it now. There's more people in the world really starting to understand the damage that's been done, and this is a solution. This is a solution that will give us that affordable power, enable us to live comfortably and warm, and not harm the environment. So now is the time. Yes, we could have done it before, but this is where we are. So I really hope that what we're trying to do, we'll try and give people that roadmap, that clear direction, that it is the right course to go down.
In hindsight, it would have been better to invest, but at the same time, now is very opportune because wind and solar is about as cheap as it will get, certainly for the next couple of years. And of course, business is now requiring green electricity, green power. And so that would be, if we do it now, it will also be, if we've got a roadmap for, within a few years we're going to have our own green power, that's going to attract new business here as well. So I think it's a perfect opportunity now.
Yeah, I don't think we've got the option of actually just sitting back and seeing what happens, because if you do that, we know that some of these international companies will have to leave the island, so it's not an option to do nothing. Standing there doing nothing, we will actually see an erosion of our international finance and company base, and we don't want that. We want to try and attract. Government does spend money on trying to attract new business here, but really the urgent and important thing now is to actually keep the businesses we've got. And to do that, we need to not only have a policy in legislation, which we've got, but we need to have clear direction and intent on the government side as well as the private sector side, that we do want to embrace this renewable energy and we do want to have a green, sustainable, affordable future.
So this isn't just that we need this for our future, really, in terms of the climate crisis. Also, it's a business and finance element as well, and that's, I think, something we don't really touch on that much. We talk about climate change and is it real, isn't it not, and that's the big debate. But actually, if we want to keep our island going financially and business-wise, this is important to invest in then, in your opinion?
Yeah, and the energy transition has also been called the Green New Deal because it will require a lot of investment. Of course, that's going to be private sector investment, but it does provide new jobs, significant number of new jobs. It's no longer deep water oil and gas that's now it's on our doorstep. We have the fuel here, so that means also revenue because we can export surplus.
Do you think the conference ultimately achieved its objectives?
Yes, I do. What we set out to do was to bring some experts to the Isle of Man, in an environment that people wanted to be there, wanted to learn, wanted to listen. And we gathered some experts who have been working in this field for a number of years, but also another small group of islands that are already started on this path where they're going to deliver 100% electricity for the Faroe Islands by 2030. So they're already 2 years down that path. They've already got some installations in place on land, and they've got some battery storage, and they're going to look for some more hydro storage, and they're going to have some solar panels. So it was great to hear firsthand how we can actually achieve that here on the Isle of Man as well.
And how was the conference funded? Was any government money involved? Was it all the ESC? How did it work out?
No, there's no government funding. This was completely independent, and the Energy and Sustainability Centre put that on. We have got some financial partners, which we're very grateful for. KPMG, Peel and Zurich have really helped us initially at the start. And we also had Athol Garage. They provided an electric car, a Nissan Leaf, which Dave took the visitors from Denmark and the Faroe Islands around the island to show them the Isle of Man. So it's great to actually have that.
They were so impressed with the Isle of Man, despite, it was variable weather, but they thought it was great. And, they're just saying, we can't believe there's no wind turbines here. There's really no renewables. So it's ready to go, I think, they can see the real opportunities here.
I assume they were like nice and safe and dry in that car, though, rather than bombing around on a motorbike in the rain. It's probably a different view. I mean, we love it here, but maybe being in a dry electric car would be helping there. So then what's next for the ESC then going forward?
Well, we have mid-November, so 15th to 18th of November, we have some courses and we have 2 workshops. The idea of the courses is really, it's about climate change because, it's good that everybody's on the same page on that one. And the second one on the Friday, the 18th, is on the energy transition itself. But on Wednesday, we have, first of all, highlights of the conference in the morning, the 16th, and then in the afternoon we're going to have a workshop where we're going to try and see what we all agree on and start a roadmap to see, okay, well, this will work for the Isle of Man, this won't, and come up with the recommendations then, for instance, on things like legislation.
And we must thank the Manx Lottery Trust for enabling those courses to be available to the public, but also free of charge to the public. So we'll be able to get your tickets on Eventbrite.
It's not quite free of charge, but the only cost is actually refreshments. So it's a very low cost. Yeah.
We're ahead of COP27. It's the buzzword on everyone's lips right now to do with environmental issues. There's the latest reports out are quite bleak really on the global failure to cut greenhouse gas emissions ahead of COP27. So do you think, is all of this going to be a bit too little too late, or do you think we can get it back and, fight the climate crisis properly?
I think it can definitely be attained. We can meet those targets, but it'll take a will and a want to do it. And that's what we're trying to do. We're not trying to criticise parties. We're actually trying to give them a roadmap and an opportunity to deliver it, but it will take effort and it will take a real desire to do that. But we think it's worth it. We love this island and we think it's worth doing that to catch up for the years that, if you like, we haven't started.
And, just thinking of the Isle of Man, there's 28 years till 2050 when we'll have net zero emissions. We have all the tools to do that actually much quicker than that. But if you think from 1903 to 1931, when Wright brothers first started flying, and 1931 there were passenger planes flying to across to New York. So you can achieve an awful lot in a few years. But the difference this time is it's economic. it's going to make a real, it's going to be the new future for the Isle of Man.
And we need all that government investment and private sector investment as well to make this happen.
Well, I would say we actually need the private sector investment, and we need the government will and want to do it.
They'll enable it,
Yeah.
facilitate it.
Yeah. So it's not the taxpayer necessarily. The government needs to really get behind this and try and make it as easy as possible for legislation for infrastructure to be built. But it really is the private sector that's going to need the investment in this. It's really too bigger for the government, really.
Around the world, there's energy companies that provide energy. That's it. It's just the government sets the framework and makes sure it's a relatively efficient process so that energy can be produced at profit, I guess.
Yeah, and that's a good point, actually, because you've got first-hand experience of the sort of model that not only benefits the oil and gas companies, if you like, or the energy companies, but also it does benefit the governments, doesn't it?
The biggest benefit is to the nation. That's always the case. But
financial benefit.
Financial benefit and all forms of benefit. But the financial benefit, but companies by their nature also need to make profit, and so that's a good partnership between government and industry.
So what does that look like? Just explain, what does that sort of consortium look like?
So there are various ways of doing it, but historically in the oil and gas industry, the government would have a share in the development. And that share, let's say it was 20% or 10%, the investment companies will pay the government share, and so it's risk-free financially. But what that also means is if it's particularly profitable, the nation benefits from that as well, not just getting the energy, but will also have a revenue from that as well. The investment in energy resources, all the benefit ends up eventually to the nation, and it does mean cheaper. It means cheaper electricity for local people, and revenue if we export some of it.
So what I'm hearing here is if I, suddenly wake up tomorrow and want to leave journalism, what I need to do is get into, the greener energy. That's the business I need to set up, really, and put all my investment in.
I would say that's a sure bet, yes.
Yeah. The world needs power. We're moving away from fossil fuels. So we have a remarkable resource here in wind, sun and water, plus elevation. That's all we need. And so that's that's our future, really.
So we were joking there about me leaving journalism and starting a career in green energy, but is that something that feasibly people could do?
Well, in Denmark, for instance, there's an island called Samsø, and all the wind and solar and actually some biomass projects are all funded by local people. It's a community investment. And they have very, very small percentages in, an individual person has a small percentage in, say, a wind turbine. And so not only are they getting relatively cheap electricity, they're also profiting from anything that's sold. The same is true in the Orkneys. So definitely there is an opportunity, if done properly, for local people to invest in their own energy as well. So they feel proud of that.
So when we have these really windy days we have here on the island, you'd be thinking, a little bit of money then in my pocket.
Yes, and of course it's lowering your electricity bills as well. To be honest, what you normally do is have a fixed price, and that predictability is nice. So you can say, okay, I know I'm going to be paying this now for the next 25 years. That's remarkable.
I think that's something we could all do with right now. Some reliable energy prices.
The Energy and Sustainability Centre is building models and options to move the Isle of Man from its current dependency on fossil fuels to future self-sufficiency in low-carbon power. This will most likely include wind and solar schemes, energy storage and changes to our electricity transmission grid. Possibilities such as green hydrogen for transport and district heating systems are also being evaluated. So are you keen to embrace this brave new world, or are you happy with the status quo? Should government be funding this, or is it better left for the private sector to deliver? I hope you enjoyed the programme, which is available as a podcast from Manx Radio's website. My particular thanks to Siobhan Fletcher for stepping in with the last interview while I was unwell. Please get in touch with Phil Gaughan at manxradio.com and let me know your thoughts and views on this programme, and let me know what you would like me to talk about in future shows. But for now, I'm Phil Gaughan. Gora Maios and Geishtech Rum. Thanks for listening.